Good evening, everyone. Thanks, everyone, for joining. Special thanks for Thalesians and ArcticDB for co-hosting this with us. My name is Renan Gemignani. I am Director of Engineering at Databento. And today, I'm here to talk about OPRA and the challenges, the technical challenges involved in onboarding this feed and distributing it to our customers. So first up, who are we? Why do we care about OPRA? So Databento, we're a market data provider. We are mostly composed of people from all over the financial industry, prop shops, market makers, asset managers, you name it. And the one thing in common about all of us is that we were all involved at some point with the process of market data acquisition and onboarding. And we all have had quite a lot of difficulty with this. So we wanted to do something better. We wanted to address the two biggest pain points in the industry. Number one, actually finding high quality data. And the second part, onboarding it into your trading applications. So we capture and distribute data right out of our co-locations. We're currently distributing data for more than 70 venues, including the entire US equity options market through the OPRA data feed, which we've been capturing since 2023. Now, first, a bit of background. What's OPRA? We're not in the US, so. OPRA is the Options Price Reporting Authority. They are to US equity options as CTA, UTP are to US equities. So the whole market is composed of 18 different exchanges, some owned by NASDAQ, some owned by NYSE, some owned by CBOE, etc. And OPRA consolidates the data from all of those exchanges and publishes the top of book and trades for all those venues. And in addition to that, it also calculates and publishes the national BBO, which is effectively the best bid and the best ask across all of the market. Now, when onboarding this feed, the first thing that you realize is that it's big. It's very big. It's enormous. So I have here a point of comparison with NASDAQ Total View, which is a market by order feed. Usually when you compare within the same exchange the top of book market, the top of book feed, and the market by order feed, the market by order feed tends to have a lot more data. But when you compare these two feeds, the OPRA PCAP size that we get per day is 80 times what we get for NASDAQ. The number of instruments that we have to handle is in the millions compared to 10 to 20,000 for US equities. And while the number of trades in the whole market is not that large comparatively, the number of BBO updates completely dwarfs any other feed that we have onboarded so far. So it's on the hundreds of billions range. And storing that data is a challenge in and of itself. So we have to have a pretty big storage cluster just to handle all of this. But today I want to focus on the challenges and just capturing it at the rate that the exchange is sending to us. And that is why it's not only big, but it's also bursty. What do I mean by that? There is the sustained rate of publishing of data from the exchange, but also there are small periods of time, for example, immediately after a trade on the underlying, that you're going to see bursts of activity on the feed within 1 to 10 milliseconds. And during those microbursts, the packet rate can go up significantly. So as you can see here, I have a comparison across some of the venues that we offer. And for most venues, you can handle those microbursts with a 10 gig line. With OPRA, that is absolutely not feasible because the peak bursts, they can go over 50 gigabits per second. Which means that if you are on the 10 gig line, you're going to drop because the data doesn't fit in the pipes. So it's big, it's bursty, and even worse, it keeps getting bigger. So this is our number of NBBO updates that we have per day since we started capturing OPRA back in 23. And you see that there's worse days, there's better days, there's bigger days, smaller days. But the one thing that we can see is that the trend, it's getting larger, and each large peak tends to be higher than the ones before it. So this last one was right around Liberation Day. And we expect that this trend line keeps going up, and this means that we have to, as a data provider, we have not only to be prepared to handle the feed as it is right now, but we need to be able to handle the next peak event. So this creates a lot of challenges for us. It's been by far the most difficult feed to onboard based on the sheer volume. And this colors our choices through the whole stack, starting with the hardware. So this is the network card that we use on our capture hosts and on our live data hosts. It's a Napatech 100G card. And there's a few things we like about this card. The first one is that it has big buffers. And big buffers are important when capturing data because during those microbursts, you're probably not going to be able to handle the packets at the rate that the exchange is sending them. So you have to stash them somewhere. That goes into the network card buffer. And the bigger your buffers, the more you can withstand these microbursts. Other things that we like about this is that because it's an FPGA onboarded on a NIC, it means it's very flexible in how you assign the buffers to different feeds. It allows you to segment feeds in a very flexible manner. And that's important for us because not only do we capture OPRA on our capture host in NY4, we also capture the prop feeds of pretty much every US equities venue. Which means that we can't just dedicate our entire buffers to OPRA. So that makes it even harder. The other thing that we like about this is that it has a user space SDK, which effectively means that when we're reading packets, we can directly access the buffer on the network card. And it avoids having to do a round trip on the kernel every time you want to receive more data. And going to kernel mode is generally bad because you're trashing your instruction cache, you're interrupting your application, and when you are getting a burst of data, what you really need is for your application to be constantly processing the packets as quickly as possible. So this user space SDK, we compile a custom version of TCP dump that uses that and to be more performant at capturing the packets. So we like this card. And the size of the feed and the bursts also, they basically force us to use NVMe flash drives. I talked to you about the storage cluster that we have for our PCAPs. That's mostly spinning hard drives. But you can't really capture OPRA into the spinning drives directly. So what we do is we have the NVMe drives, we capture onto them first, and then we ship them off to the spinning cluster. Our storage engineers could probably do a whole nother talk just about the spinning cluster. And also, while we're talking about hardware, kernel tuning, core isolation, NUMA node isolation, core pinning, all of this is instrumental to ensure that the applications that are dedicated to capture all those TCP dump processes, that they can work uninterrupted and that they can just keep pumping out more data. So it's pretty much a necessity. You can't get away without this kind of tuning if you want to achieve lossless capture. Now, this doesn't mean that you can just take the nice hardware, dump the feed into it, and expect everything to work. We tried that. It doesn't work. So we have to get a little bit creative. One thing that we do is increase the parallelization of our capture by sharding the feed into multiple blocks. So OPRA is not one giant line. It's actually 96 separate channels, and they distribute the options across those channels. And what this means is that each channel is relatively independent from the others, which means that we can process them in parallel. So what we do is we take all those 96 channels, we group them into 8 blocks of 12, and we assign a 4 GB host buffer in the network card to each one of those shards. Now, one interesting thing about this channel division is that though they Opera does their best to divide the volume of those channels, they are not actually very even. If you just take randomly eight channels into any shard, you can end up with a situation like at the top here, where one shard is getting a much higher packet rate than another, which means that when you get a burst, maybe the bigger shard drops while the other shard is idle, doing what it normally does, which is not that much. So we regularly have to rebalance our shards, which means we take a look at the packet rate for each one of those channels, and we strive to group them in a way that not only that the final size of the data is relatively even, but that the bursts are not correlated within the same shard. Because imagine if the bursts in one shard are completely correlated, all of the channels in your shard burst at the same time, and then maybe you drop packets. So to avoid this, we are regularly reanalyzing the packet rates and distributing them so that we can get something nice and even like the rates at the bottom, where all of the shards, they do roughly the same amount of work. Now, that's it for our capture, but we don't do only historical data. We are also distributing this data in real time to our customers. And real-time data, it introduces a few other complications. The first one is that you're not just saving the packets to disk. So when we are distributing live data, we have to receive the feeds, deduplicate the packets, parse the exchange protocol, normalize this into our internal protocol, and then send it to our client, save some of it to disk, which is quite a bit more work than just straight up I/O. Now, everything that I mentioned before, it still applies here. We still use the same cards. We still use the same style of sharding. And yeah, everything still applies. Core isolation, NUMA node, alignment. But also, the other complication is that we are distributing this in real time, and customers have latency expectations. So it's not enough to just take a giant buffer and stash the packets there and hope for the best. Otherwise, the latencies can become complicated. And we have to process this at the rate that the exchange is sending it to avoid buffering and latency spikes. Now, one way of improving this is just processing less data. As programmers like to say, the fastest code is the code that doesn't have to run. So one thing that we do here is we distribute this feed over internet for some of our customers. And this means that we have to be bandwidth conscious of what we send. And one thing is that a lot of our customers are only interested in the NBBO, only in the consolidated view of the market. Now, I mentioned before that Opera consolidates and publishes a top of book for all of the venues. And this means that in most of those updates, they don't actually change the NBBO. And by just doing that, we can actually ignore 80% of the data that the exchange sends us. So we receive it on the NIC, and then we immediately drop it as soon as we realize that it's not an update to the NBBO. And in the graph here, we have everything that the exchange sends versus only the NBBO updates. It's quite a huge difference. And most importantly, the difference is at its highest at the moments where there is the most data flowing through, which is immediately after the open, immediately before the close. Now, the other thing that we can do, aside from processing less data to begin with, is to avoid blocking the critical path. So as I mentioned before, we want the applications to be processing data uninterrupted. This is even more true for live data. At Databento, we provide top-of-book trades data, but we also provide subsampled data. So 1 minute, 1 second, 1 hour bars, and BBO subsampled on intervals, which is extremely important for a lot of our clients that might be receiving our data through internet line, and they don't really have the bandwidth to take in the entire feed with all of the quotes. So they use a subsampled schema where they get 1 update per second. Now, generating this schema on live data, it presents its own difficulties, because if you try to do it in line while you're processing the data, accumulating the bars, it means that every second, for each one of the 1.6 million instruments that Opera has, we need to stop and publish the subsampled BBOs and the bars for that interval. Now, if you do that on the critical path, you're stalling for maybe a couple milliseconds, and that's just enough time for you to drop packets. So one thing that we've had to do, we've only really had to do this for Opera so far. For all the other venues that we have, we can actually receive the data exchange rate and compute the subsampled schemas. But for Opera, it really doesn't work. So here the pink line is our first try of computing this data in band, and the blue line is when we moved all of the subsampled schemas out of band. So not only is the latency uniformly better, also the spikes are less frequent and they are less intense. So the bottom line is that you really want your critical loop of receiving packets, normalizing, and publishing to be as lean as possible, to not give any opportunity for a microburst to catch you doing something else. So this was the talk I wanted to give. If you're interested in options data, at Databento we have plans that are suitable for both small and larger enterprises. We distribute live data over internet with cloud handoffs and also dedicated connectivity. We have historical data starting from 2013, and we have PCAP files for the last 2 years since 2023. So if you go on the QR code, you can take a look at what we offer for the data. Now, I'd like to open for questions if anybody has any.
I'm just curious about on your underlying programming language, all this is written in.
Oh, we actually have kind of a split situation. So our feed handlers are written in C++, and our distribution gateway, the thing that the clients actually connect to, that's written in Rust. So we have two halves of the program that communicate through shared memory. And there are very good reasons for us choosing each language for each part. So because Rust really shines on lifetime and concurrency to do it safely. And when you have an endpoint that is accessible by clients that might be inadvertently doing things like buffer overflows on your side just because this is a publicly accessible API, we want that side of the business to be as safe as possible. Also, the Rust async framework really helps us in dealing with slow clients, for example, because we use TCP for the transport. But on the feed handler side, we use C++ mostly because you don't have the allocation safety problem, because you allocate a giant slab of memory and you work with it. And lifetime considerations aren't as important. Also, the critical loop does the least possible amount of thread interchange because of all the reasons I've already mentioned before. So we use a little bit of C++, a little bit of Rust. We like Rust better, but go ahead.
Internally, when you're sending like data packets, assuming between computer systems, were there any like kind of like a topic or queue system that you use, or did you develop anything internally?
No, so for our feed handlers currently, we have both the top half and the bottom half running on the same host, and they communicate with each other through a shared memory queue. And this is basically as good as you can get in inter-process communication latency. So of course there are trade-offs. We are considering moving some of our client load out of the same box as the feed handler that allows us to handle more clients, but of course that comes at a cost of latency. So you're always trying to balance the scalability and the latency you get, and if you go into high frequency trading, you will see that a lot of times it will optimize for the lower latency, and if anything needs to get dropped, it will. Go ahead.
So the 8 terabytes today, is that compressible at all after you normalize it in your own formats, or is that pretty much 8 terabytes?
I'm pretty sure that's compressed already. That's like ZST compressed. Jack, correct me if I'm wrong.
Can't remember offhand.
Yeah, but no, but this is all compressed already.
Great. So you have very nice suppliers of hardware systems.
Oh yeah, our procurement people are very busy. And see, because we are constantly having to buy more. Like Luca likes to post those thirst traps of hardware on LinkedIn. Every now and then we have to onboard new racks with more drives. It's a job. Go ahead.
When you do the kernel bypass and the context switching, when you're preventing context switching, are you doing that yourself? Would you have a provider on NIC?
No, so yeah, that's what I mentioned about the user space SDK. We are not reverse engineering the network card. So they have their own kernel bypass API, and we use that. So it basically does all the DMA stuff. So we're basically consumers of the API of the NIC vendor.
Okay. Do you ever have issues with NAC storms or?
Sorry?
With like TCP storms?
Oh, we don't use. So this is all UDP multicast. So like TCP doesn't go in that side. Actually, like for example, on our capture hosts, it's ingress only. And on our live data, the ingress is UDP multicast and the egress is TCP. But we use a different card for that because we don't want the NIC that is handling the incoming traffic, the incoming fire hose of data from the exchange to also be handling the data that we send to the clients. So we separate both of them. We actually have 2 NICs on board every live data host. Go ahead.
What is the latency that you're running then?
We actually
Exchange to client endpoint.
we make that. We have a public endpoint for that, so you can go on our website and check it out. We try to be as transparent as possible about it when it's good and when it happens to be not good. So we try to be very open about this. So when customers ask us about what latency do you provide, we have statistics on our website for a few cloud regions and for interconnect with our from data centers. And the end-to-end latency, it's kind of a hard number for us to say because in most cases, it really depends on where you're getting the data from. And it really depends on the speed that the client is consuming the data. But we make this public. I'd be happy to share it with you right afterwards. But for example, if you're getting the data through the internet or via direct connectivity and on a cross-connect on NY4 to NY4, the numbers are going to be completely different.
Thanks, Remy. Sorry, I'm going to have to call time on that, but I'm sure Remy's going to, Renan's going to be around afterwards if you want to ask him any more questions.
Yeah, I'm here all week, guys.